And Jack hit the road. Yaakov halach ladarkei. Jacob went on his way. His way, what's his way? Well, we just come from the holiday season, full of holidays. That's God's ways that we follow. Now we go back to our regular routine. We hit the road. Darkei, our way, our path, our thing. That's hit the road, Jack. We're on the road, doing our thing. And in doing that thing, we're going to get trials and tribulations. We're going to get challenges. And in those challenges, we know when we are confronting them, they're brought in living color, Kodak moment from God Almighty. When we know that, then we have great joy. And we're able to overcome the trials and tribulations. And that is the turbulent waters, the floods of the day that we need to deal with. Challenges, the personal challenges, collective challenges that the Jewish people are now going through. It's in order that we can have great joy and rise above. We begin today the 26th letter. It's based on the teachings of the Zohar. Zohar, written by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon, famous Tanya, who lived in the first century. Spent 13 years in a cave because the Romans came after him. So, as the verse says in the book of Daniel, and the wise shall shine like the radiance of the firmament. So the Zohar comments on this. With this work of yours, which is the book of the Zohar, which means a book of radiance of Ima Ilah, which means the higher form of mother, which is Bina, understanding, which is also the idea of Tshuva Ilah, meaning the higher form of return to God, not because you did something wrong, but because God's infinite and we're finite, and there's always a constant movement of getting closer. Right? Tashuv Hey, to return the Hey in God's name. 2 Heys in God's name. So the lower one is for fixing the things we need to fix, and the higher one, which represents Bina, we have an understanding of the infinite of God and the finite nature of man, and therefore there always is a movement of tshuva. So those who will study this book of the radiance of the Zohar, which brings a person to tshuva ilah, to bring one constantly in a movement closer to the divine, no trial is needed. Meaning, in the times before Mashiach comes, what we're holding right now, incidentally, parenthetically, right? Those who will study from this book they won't have to suffer the trials and tribulations at the end of times. God alone will lead them. They won't have any strange God with them. Why? Because this book is the book of, that is a reflection or an embodiment of the tree of life. It's the tree of life. And it will give life, the teachings, in such a way that before Mashiach's coming, where the world needs to have a refinement where there has to be a very distinct separation between good and evil. That distinction will be so clear because of the teachings that you will stand on the side of good, and therefore you won't have the challenge. Wow, is this ever talking about today's situation? As opposed to, the Zohar continues in its teachings, the tree of good and evil, which an example of that is a prohibition, permission, the impurity, the purity. That will no longer dominate at that time. Sustenance will come from the tree of life, where there is no problematic query. There's only problematic query from the side of negativity, of evil. Thus, the Torah scholars will not be sustained by the illiterate people, but from the side of good, who eat from the pure, kosher, and permitted. Nor they will be sustained by the mixed multitude, continues the Zohar, quoting the Zohar, the Alter Rebbe, who eat from the impure, ritually unfit, and prohibited. So Zohar continues and explains, while the tree of good and evil dominates the world now, but the sages who are likened to Shabbos and festivals have nothing except that which is given to them by the ones who are not holy. But just like Shabbos, you need to prepare for it beforehand. So therefore, there was a preparation beforehand from the unholy. So therefore, in the times they will get from the unholy. However, the tree of life will then dominate, and it will suppress the tree of good and evil. And the illiterate people will only have what the Torah scholars give them. They will be subjugated at that time. And accordingly, the prohibited and permitted, the impure and pure, will not be removed from the illiterate, because they will still need to study that in the times of Mashiach. And there will only be a distinction for them, for the illiterate, meaning those who are not literate in the mystical teachings, that they will only be released from the servitude of the nations of the world. Why? Because they have not tasted from the tree of life, meaning mystical, Kabbalistic, teachings, or here in the Zohar specifically, speaking with the book of the Zohar. And therefore they're going to have to learn the Mishnah that speaks about the do's and the don'ts, the pure and the impure, because they will be on such a level themselves. That's the end of the quote of the Zohar. Woo. So at first glance, first of all, a very difficult and challenging teachings. First glance, it looks like from the passage, those who will be studying, who are studying today the Mishnah or the Talmud that speaks about ritual prohibition and permission and the like, that it relates to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that's very surprising. That's from the first glance that's what you might think the Zohar is saying, which of course contradicts the very simple notion, because the tree of knowledge of good and evil is klipa, it's a shell of covering over. How can we say that about Torah? Right, as we know, when we say Eitz Chaim Hi L'Machazikim Ba, when the Torah scroll is picked up, when we read from it, we're saying the entire Torah is the tree of life, not just the mystical teachings. And especially the Zohar in those days was concealed. Only a select few would study. So only a select few had a connection to the tree of life. And he didn't even study publicly. It was privately studying the mystical teachings. And it's only the Arizal in the last several hundred years that said now it's the proper time that we are obligated to study, everybody, the hidden mystical teachings. But that's only now. Back then it wasn't that way. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, again, the author over here of the sacred Zohar, himself says that permission is only to teach it to his associates, that were on a lofty level. This too is also remarkable. So how can we say from the superficial reading that the Zohar, that's the tree of life, but the Mishnah and other works of the oral Torah, that is a reflection of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Can't be. And further to make the argument, those that are on a level like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself, back in the day there were great sages that their Torah study was so great that it pushed away their obligation to pray. Overrides the obligation to pray. Well, prayer is based on supernal unions, very lofty, mystical things, and yet they would not study, even they would not pray as we do today. I'm talking about a couple thousand years ago. They wouldn't interrupt their studies of the Mishnah, of the Talmud, which is about the do's and the don'ts, not mystical teachings. And yet prayer is based on mysticism. So there seems to be a little difficulty with that notion. How could that be? Moreover, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's the do's and the don'ts. That's the conclusion. That's the conclusion of the teachings. But even the arguments and the queries, the questions and the answers and the back and forth, are also, saying the Alter Rebbe, they're not from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, even though, question and answer might be, you might think that, right? You might think that, but no, even that is not from a mixture of good and bad. That's pure Torah. While Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was 13 years in a cave, he actually said, I became, worthy from all the anguish that I went through in the cave by the study that I went through, that I was able to answer when Pinchas ben Yair would ask a question. I could give 24 answers. Why? Because of the anguish I went through in the cave, and I was able to answer, and that was question and answer. That's part of the revealed parts of Torah, not the mystical parts. And that was his principal occupation in the cave, was not study of the Zohar, because for him to study the Zohar, which he would have done only one time, because we're talking about a sage that, one time he got it and doesn't forget it, that would have taken him a few months only. But what was he doing the rest of the time? He was studying the whole time, him and his son, for 13 years. They were studying the whole time in the cave, hiding from the Romans that came after them to kill them. And what did they spend their time? With the study of the Mishnah, the Talmud, the queries, all the questions and the answers back and forth. That's what it was engaged in. So how could you say that the one we're quoting now from the Zohar, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of it, that he was studying the Torah that's related to the tree of knowledge of good and evil? That's an admixture? How can you say that? When he could be able to study from only mystical teachings, that is, the tree of life. Moreover, our sages have taught that since the day the temple was destroyed, the Holy One, blessed be He, only has 4 cubits of Jewish law, which means the study of not mystical teachings, but of the Mishnah, Jewish law, and the like. So we can't say from the superficial look at the of the teachings of the Zohar that the only part that is related to the tree of life is the mystical Kabbalistic teachings, and the other areas of the Torah, Jewish law, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, that is the back and forth of the debate in Jewish law. Is this kosher, not kosher? Is this valid, not valid? Is this pure, not pure? Some of the things we see the adjudication of it in the Rambam's teachings, which, by the way, I can't give the class today. The adjudication, right? All of the Rambam's teachings. So it can't be that that's an expression of the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is an admixture. No, all of the Torah has to be an expression of the tree of life. That's the argument he's making. We will continue with that argument and understanding the Torah, how it is all of it the tree of life. And what does it mean then? Well, how do we understand the Zohar in the way it seems to suggest that that area is a mixture of good and bad? What does that mean? It's Torah. It's God's wisdom. God's wisdom is all good. It's all life, just as God is all life. More on that to come. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zich and Kadesh Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Sorry that it isn't Rambam today or tomorrow. It's just other obligations. Thank you. God bless.